It is breathtaking that a man so utterly at odds with everything that the respectable wings of the Conservative Party are supposed to stand for can retain their affection and admiration on such an abiding scale. Even Michael Gove, who knows a thing or two about backstabbing, even Michael Gove concluded that Boris Johnson did not have the bottom to be the party leader, and it seemed to be a realisation built upon the revelation that self-interest motivates his every decision. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm going to tell you something that actually makes me feel a little bit ill. And that sounds a bit hyperbolic. It sounds a little bit over the top. It is probably surprising to anybody who's got Boris filed under court jester still. But there is a line in his biography of Churchill, which is not a book you should waste any time reading. There's a line in there that makes sense of the man. I'm saying this quite often at the moment on the programme. This desperate search for things that doesn't exist. It's a little bit banal on my part, but I can't help it. I want to find the keys. You know, it's because I played too many video games as a kid. So the idea that you can find a rock that slots in to a stone hole and then suddenly a massive gate opens and you gain entry into the hidden city. Not just old video games. It's a little like Drake's Fortune, that, isn't it? But I have this idea. I spent so much of my youth searching for single signet, single symbols, single little keys that would unlock huge swathes of new territories. And I have a similar approach to journalism. And every now and then I stumble across something that I think just sums stuff up. In his biography of Boris Johnson, of Winston Churchill, forgive me, Boris Johnson, to my mind, and this is certainly something we can discuss, he effectively, and I'm going to use the word accuses, so desperate is he, in every page of this book, to portray Churchill as a sort of prototype Boris Johnson, that he suggests Winston Churchill's decision early in the 1930s to campaign against Hitler was a cynical act of self-interest. That's how I read this. You're welcome to disagree with me, but if you want to understand this man, I think you need to think about this line. He writes in this book, to some extent, all politicians are gamblers with events. They try to anticipate what will happen to put themselves on the right side of history. I recognise that description of many politicians, but all of the politicians worthy of the sobriquet statesman would do the opposite of that, in my humble opinion. It is to do unpopular things that turn out to be correct, that make the real mark of a politician, of a statesman. Johnson flies in entirely the opposite direction to that thought. And it gets worse. He suggests that when Churchill, in the early 30s, ploughed a somewhat lonely furrow in British politics, a very lonely furrow in the sort of highfalutin circles whence Winston Churchill hailed, he was effectively, and I'm going to quote this to get it right, he put his shirt on a horse called anti-Nazism, and his bet came off in spectacular fashion. Our Foreign Secretary wrote those words, not some kind of ratings-chasing, pot-boiler writing thriller author. Our Foreign Secretary claimed that Winston Churchill's decision to oppose Nazism was a principle-free attempt to second-guess where history was going and placing himself on the right side of it subsequently. I would remind you that if Hitler had triumphed, if he had been ushered into Britain by many members of the aristocracy from which Winston Churchill hailed, if he had fulfilled the dreams of, for example, the man who owned the Daily Mail at the time, and become the Führer of these islands, the politicians who had led opposition to him would have been publicly executed.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.